And I suppose you can get a drink service in the morning here. It's like when I was at university, I wish they served drinks in classrooms like they do on the ship. I would have studied more, I figure. But anyway, good morning. And today I'm talking about our great land ahead of us, New Zealand, Aotearoa, the Maori name for the country. And I feel a little humbled because you really should have a New Zealander up here talking about this great land and culture. But I appreciate your confidence in my own lack of confidence. And also, you can bear with my mispronunciations of the various words and ways of saying it. But then again, it's always other people who have an accent. You have your very own personal vocal perspective. So you can correct my, particularly Maori, which I am only briefly familiar with, but I'll show you some more of this. This picture is of the Bay of Islands, and it does represent the name in Maori for this great land because the Polynesian navigators would sense land over the horizon by cloud patterns. And so when they came in their voyaging canoes from central Polynesia here, they probably saw that as a sign that there was a land over here. And then as they went further south from the North Island, then to the South Island, the great mountain range that is on the South Island has even more dramatic cloud formations to match the alpine mountain ranges. But we are going, of course, to the North Island, which is relatively flat with valleys and many lakes and many lush areas. And we're first going to the Bay of Islands, which is the semi-tropical part of New Zealand, North Island. And as I described on my other talk about oceanography of the Pacific, New Zealand actually is the tip of a vaster piece of submerged continental shelf. So it is much larger, of course, underwater that we don't see, but it is volcanically active. It's right, this is right where we are now, right over the Tongan Trench, which comes down to the North Island where we're going, and has some active volcanoes. And so there again may be more land that is coming up any minute now, like White Island off of the North Island is a growing volcano. This is a very large one that's up in the trench north of the island where it's a tremendous sized volcano that is now dormant, but maybe not for long. So here you have the North Island. We have particularly the Bay of Islands on the northern peninsula, and then Auckland right at the center of that peninsula. Then we have all these lakes, some of which are, let's say, full of hot water, steam baths from volcanic activity below the surface. And then the Cook Channel and then the South Island becomes quite mountainous as you go further south. I'm going to be talking about the ports on our ongoing segment. So for this talk today, I'm just going to describe the Auckland area and then some of the Maori culture and some of the features that make the national spirit of New Zealand. And we are, of course, going to come right into the bay and then down to Auckland, and then we'll continue around to Tauranga, not landing at Gisborne, but Napier, and then we'll come to Wellington, and then further to the South Island. But as of tomorrow, we're here in this beautiful tranquil bay, which has dozens of islands and is a sort of a paradise for particularly sailing and water sports. And this is the town of Russell, also Kororeka in Maori. And this was where the first settlers from England came. And it is also a place where whalers came to trade for foodstuffs with the Maori people in that area. So it is the historic heart of the founding of the nation, at least in the modern era. So this is Kerikeri, and this building is the oldest, I believe, in all of New Zealand. Bill McKay, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's one of the early colonial settlement that has remained to this day as a historic monument. And then we will continue down to Auckland, which is sort of a great city that's surrounded by water along this peninsula of the North Island, and it has all the fresh air that you can want in a major city because it's surrounded by these bays and islands and terrain that gives it a particular charm compared to most other major cities. It is the largest city of New Zealand, though the capital was moved to Wellington, which is more central to the whole nation, and we'll be there next week. But Auckland is now a modern, let's say, glass box construction of more and more centralized downtown with the great Sky Tower in the center, and then suburban areas that spread out into the North Shore and down to Franklin and off into the islands. So there's always a way right out of town, either by ferry or road links that take you out into the countryside and off to a beach and places. But we're going to be docking right downtown, and therefore we are within walking distance of many of the sites. There are hills above it, the Domain and some of the museums and gardens are not too far, but we will be right here in the central area next to the Maritime Museum. And then you see that's called the Viaduct Basin. That used to be an industrial side of the harbor, but now it's been turned into cafes and parks and promenade along the waterfront. And then you can go right up and go to the Rugby Hall of Fame if you care for a bit of a scrum there. But above the town is these overlooks of these great parks. This was a former fortress overlooking the whole area originally, and then now it has the Cornwall Park and the One Tree Hill. The tree was an ancient tree that was a meeting ground, actually. Now it's a monument to the founding of the nation up on the very top with an overlook of the whole city. Of course, matched by the great Sky Tower. And again, it's a city that has water all around it. So it has been called the City of Sails, and the aquatic life and marine culture is very rich in Auckland. Of course, it was also the birth of the great racing yachts that have been winning all the races occasionally. Now, this is a great Sky Tower, and I don't know if they still do it, but they have bungee jumping off of the top, with or without a cord, maybe, but I don't know if they still allow it. If I was so bold, I'd just watch other people do it. But anyway, you have the Auckland Museum, the Historical Museum, and then the waterfront, where we will be docked right alongside that with the great ferry terminal and all the big box banks and such. But there is some Victorian architecture that is preserved and in good respect. But this is the heart of the harbor with all of the yachts you would ever want, I would say. There's a adage in the ocean sailing community that if you want to buy a fully equipped season yacht for transoceanic travel, go to Auckland, because that's where sailors who have come from Europe or the Americas end up in Auckland. And when they finally get there after their months at sea, usually the crew and the skipper or the mate walk in different directions, and then the boat is suddenly for sale at a very great discount. So if you're looking for a yacht, there's plenty for sale there. And then there's the racing. I mean, every young person in the Auckland area grows up racing, sailing, and so that's why it's the, let's say, the breeding ground of all of the great competitors and helms people, and most famously, Sir Peters Blake was the champion of the original Team New Zealand. Unfortunately, he lost his life in the Amazon a number of years ago, and now he's sort of the patron saint of the maritime community and the racing community. And then around the rest of the city, there are gardens and historic sites from the earlier days. And they also have this great bridge, sort of an echo of the bridge in Sydney. And then if you go out on the islands by ferry, you go to Davenport and other natural areas that are right outside of the central city. This is the volcano, which is in the harbor, Rangitoto, which is a nature preserve, a dormant volcano so far. But the land gets very dramatic with the rocks and the sea and the iconic looks like this of the cathedral cave. It is a bit of evocative of the Maori creation myth, with when Tane and Ranga, the land god and the water god, were a couple, and they were embraced, and they made the world by separating and then revealing the land and the water separately. But here you have let's say an image of of that is very much like the other parts of going up the Bay Island to the point. This is Cape Reinga, which is the very northern tip of the island, which is where the first Polynesian navigators came and landed. And this is, I say, where the Maori dead will go to return to Hawaii, which is on the island of Raiatea, where they have the great marae, where the Polynesian people went out from there to come all the way down through the various islands we've been, then down to New Zealand. And up there's a statue to Kane Raitea, rather, let's say, mythic in the European style, but is an honor to those first Polynesians who came to settle about 1,200 years ago. They started in the North Island and made settlements and populated the whole island group all the way down. These are the great voyaging canoes, and I'll have a talk about the navigation and the construction of those on another day in the next segment. But just for here, the first European was Abel Tasman, who came to see Tasmania, named after him, and then he sighted New Zealand. He did not land and did not make any settlement, but he did give it the name that it has. And of course, here's a trivia question: where is Old Zealand? It's part of Denmark, actually. But anyway, that's more trivia that may not be true. And of course, we talked already about Captain Cook when he came and was the first to chart the course, the coast, and then have contact with the Maori people. You can see in this image that they were waving at him, "Please come to our gift shop," I think is what they originally said to him. And so there's a lot of prominent outlooks over the sea and navigational aids as you go down the coast. And so we'll have a view of some of this dramatic seascape, including we'll go past the peninsula where Bill was raised, where the rocket launch is on the tip of that peninsula. But when the first Maori came and then the Europeans came, they came to a very lush land that had dense forest of unique endemic trees. This is the Pahutakawa. Pahutakawa? All right, good. And then there were also vast forests of the kauri tree, which are it's been called the great redwoods, the lords of the forest, of which almost all were taken down for clearing the land for agriculture, or also for shipbuilding, devoured much of it. So this grows a very straight trunk, and this is one of the oldest ones, said to be over 1,000 years old, with 52 meters high, with a 13-meter diameter. And this was said in Maori that the kauri and the whale were friends, each having a home, one on land and another on the sea. But now there's preserves of them, and it's still somewhat of a sacred tree to the Maori. The other indigenous wildlife was great flocks of these moa, who are like an ostrich and other related birds, were terrestrial, flightless. And New Zealand was the home of many species that are now extinct, alas, by first the Maori, and who brought in dogs and rats and pigs, and then the Europeans came and cleared out many. So much of that has now gone extinct. We have some fossil evidence, but there's very dedicated efforts to preserve what bird life is still there from these predators. Here's the keruku, and then the famous kiwi, which has its long snout, which has very sensitive smell. It pokes around the ground, and feathers that look more like fur. And they nest together, and the female will lay an egg that is 20% of its body, a very big egg for a very small bird. And then the male sits on the egg, as all males should. And so this is the national symbol in many ways that is rarely seen. They do have places where you can see them with in captivity. They reverse the light so that you can see them in the day, in the dark. But these great birds became part of the dress with great feather capes. I mean, this is a Polynesian tradition you can also see in Hawaii and other places. But this was native dress that was quite elaborate, but now is mostly only a few examples in museums because this great bird life has mostly been extinct or exterminated. But these are the first images that the Europeans had of the Maori people, which are quite distinctive, let's say, and the headdress and the tattooing of the face was done at various points in a person's life to signify their coming of age or their rank in their own family group. And so when the Europeans came, they came to a culture that was very elaborate, had a parallel matrilineal patriarchal structure within their own clan group, but women were fairly equal, and but they also had slaves that were captured from other groups, and so it was within the family, it was a more egalitarian society, but the competition meant there was a lot of warfare. And this, again, it was a Polynesian tradition that place would get too overpopulated, or they would begin conflict, and then they would the losing side would move on and find new territory. That way, they filled up all of the islands here. So then came the first settlements in the early 1800s, mostly coming from either commercial purposes or missionary groups. At one point, they had so many missionaries that there was nobody there to do business in some ways. And so then the contact with the Bowery was critical, because this was a culture that was very, first of all, very verbal. They had an oral tradition. They did not have a written language, but they had very elaborate, let's say, memory of their heritage, going back many, many generations to the founding of the land. And then the Europeans came and gave some literacy and began writing Maori in Roman letters. And then even in the 1840s, they began publication of newspapers in Maori. And this contact was first friendly, trading. For instance, the ships would come and trade iron goods and even simple nails and knives and things like that for food. And but it quickly turned into some conflict over land as more of the settlers came in. And then in 1840, the Treaty of Waitangi is considered the founding of the nation, where 40 of the chieftains came and signed the document that would then, let's make the basis of cooperation. And this is greatly debated because this document was never certified back in London as legally binding upon either side, and then it has been said that the Maori didn't quite understand the European or English concept of land rights or title, and also occupation of what was a shared communal society at that point. Well, this was done at this cottage, which is now the historic site in the Bay of Islands. And then the New Zealand company began to promote the settlers. And so this is the flag of the company, sort of like the East India Company or other commercial interests around the world that were chartered and funded from the home country, and then were the sponsor of many immigrant who came all the way here. And New Zealand, of course, back then was so far away that only some people came, and that's why it was never a place of mass emigration, let's say, nor was it ever a convict colony. But the first fivers came, as they say, the first 5 ships came and settled and traded, and at this point the contact became, let's say, not so happy, because they gave muskets to some of the groups who then began more warfare that lasted for decades and killed thousands of Maori, because rather than having more ritualistic warfare with clubs and spears, they were now quite adept at musketry and modern warfare. But all through the different islands and communities, they had these tremendous fortresses they would build, some of which remain as ruins these days. But this was an era of what they call the land wars, where the settlers and the different groups would fight, and it was a sad period, let's say, because the tensions were so strong that finally the Royal Navy came in and bombarded fortresses, and there were dramatic battles. This is the illustration of when Hone Heke came up and he chopped down the mast that had the Union Jack on it. And then there were massacres on either side. I mean, the Maori, of course, lost most of their land and people in these kind of battles. But here's a monument that's in Russell that says, for the fallen of the HMS Hazard, and if you can read it, I'll just say, the warlike of the isles, the men of the field and wave, are not the rocks their funeral piles, and the seas and the shores their graves? Go, stranger, track the deep, free the white sails spread. Wave may not foam, nor wild winds sweep, where rest not England's dead. Well, this is typical of the empire all around the world. But meanwhile, the Maori were in all of these, we call iwi, the different clan groups that had their own territory, and they gradually ceded much of that land to settlers, and with some resistance and some legalities that tried to keep the culture together. But the population of the Maori was estimated at least 100,000 upon first contact, and then it was down to maybe 20 or 30,000 by the time of its nadir in the early 1900s. But these pictures from the past show the strength of some of the chieftain and their different area, and they all had their ware, their meeting house, which we'll see many of, and these are the ceremonial community centers that are quite elaborately built, and they're still making them or restoring them. They're it's more of a symbolical architecture. It was used as a meeting house where the people would gather and discuss and have their ceremonies. Many of them are carved with beautiful posts and images of the various gods or else ancestors, and this is where the iconography of Maori culture is quite striking, and not unrelated to all the other Polynesian peoples and other islands. But the wood carving is one of the high arts of the culture, and with the inlay of shell as eyes and other mythology that is sort of built into the architecture. This is in Rotorua, a old a entrance with the symbology of Hinemoa and Tunanekai, who were the Romeo and Juliet couple of the traditional myths, where Hinemoa lived on an island in the lake, and the young man Tunanekai played the flute on shore miles away, but she could hear him playing, and she longed for him, and he longed for her, but the clans did not intermarry, and so one day she decided to go find him, and so she took her gown and wrapped calabash gourds, and then walked into the sea. She didn't want to take a canoe. People would know that she had gone over to see him, but she floated and swam all the way to meet him, and then arose out of the lake looking a bit like this, and then they were finally united and were formally married. Romeo and Juliet all over again, but this is an example of another leader of a clan, but this has a very distinctive robe. They call this the classic period with certain bird feathers, the chin moku or tattoo for the women, and then a robe of feathers and a jade or nephrite greenstone emblem. So this tradition was carried forth, though many of the old vestments were lost in time and replaced by European clothing. But it's come back to some degree. These old pictures of some of the greeting ceremonies are now historic, but this goes on. This tradition of welcoming strangers somewhat warily at first, but now it's a formal custom in all of New Zealand. But over time, the women who had an egalitarian level in the traditional society asserted their rights. This was an educator who promoted that women should also be allowed to vote, and New Zealand became the first nation in the world with the enfranchisement of women as voters and then as political leaders to this day, as you know. And the clan structures continued in various areas, and this is one of the queens of one of them who had a funeral not too long ago. And the Haka tradition, or the warlike Maori tradition continues on to this day. So this is now let's say, a well-known function where the men will come out and dance and make faces and sort of have a ceremonial face-off with visitors. And of course, famously, the rugby teams do this. But we'll probably see this right off the dock, perhaps, somewhere. It's frightening at first, but then it's also meant to be welcoming, as is done for international visitors. So this is some diplomatic representatives who come and are given the haka greeting. Now you can look at the French general there who feels like he is terribly overdressed for the climate. And he has to keep his reserve on while he's being greeted. But correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but the men will come out and do the haka. I won't imitate it myself. And then the women come out and actually welcome the same. They say, no, we are not going to have a battle with you. Come into the ware, have a greeting. And so this is a tradition that comes, let's say, from the ancient past right into the present. And it's said that the Maori, like some other people with an ancient tradition, they preserve what they can in the face of modernism, but they live in the present tense. And hopefully the battles of the past, for instance, the land wars and other conflicts in New Zealand, have kind of melded these cultures together, represented by this particular monument. And then in times of war, the Maori have joined the military and have served in World War I, World War II. And this is actually an old Coca-Cola commercial of New Zealand, of them sharing the tattoos over a little Coca-Cola. I don't know what's more dangerous for you, the tattoo or the Coca-Cola. But even nowadays, if you are in the New Zealand military, you can get your face tattoo. I guess that's one way to not get mixed up with your other shipmates. But it's called now the Maritanga, the way of life, so that the Maori and the Pakeha, the European or other people from around the world that come here are sharing a certain cultural background that means that even the children are raised speaking some Maori. There've been generations now that have gone to elementary school to learn the language, and the language has had a revival. You can listen to the radio and TV and films that are made in Maori now. And then the tradition of the tattoo has certainly spread far and wide, as the sign says, the original Facebook. And there's a great sense of cooperation, I can say. It's a very relatively peaceful country, even though it has its serious troubles like the massacre in Christchurch just recently. But that's very much the exception to the general rule of peace and cooperation that is a hallmark of New Zealand. And so this traditional greeting of the forehead is really a gesture of close humanity. And even babies practice this. Oh, that's a scary one. Oh, anyway, over time, the kid may wash its face. We're not sure, and get a permanent one. But here's even the national seal has the cooperation between the Maori and the Pakeha, and this country has a proud tradition that is still in development. So in recent years, there's been a referendum whether there should be a new flag, primarily because New Zealand became a Commonwealth nation. It became completely independent of Whitehall in England in 1947, I believe it was. And the flag, of course, it carried over. And unfortunately, it's often confused with the Australian flag. Just the outline of the stars are different. So there's been a debate whether it should be the fern leaf, which is the traditional sign of rebirth in the Maori culture. So that you'll see this flag around, which is the Maori flag, and it has that fern symbology at the center of it, the kopu, which then was actually used as food in these great lush ferns that grow in the different parts. But it's a symbol of fertility, and now you can have it, take a souvenir of it home along with your Maui hook and other items of indigenous symbology. There's a lot of this greenstone, which is a nephrite, not a jade per se, but they make very unusual designs with it, some of which are Polynesian, some of which are modern. So there's a contemporary art and crafts that is very abundant and striking in all parts of New Zealand. And some modern artists are recreating some of the gods. This is Tune, the earth god. And if we go down to Wellington, you will see, if you go to Te Papa, the National Museum, there's this tremendous ware that is been built by contemporary artists to symbolize the settlement from Polynesia to New Zealand. And so this is the iconography of the tradition that is done in a most psychedelic kind of a way. And many things are then given this kind of either palm leaves or ferns or other versions of the tattoos, even on swim fins. And of course, this is a maritime culture. You have a lot of water on all sides, and the waka, or the racing canoes, the big ones, war canoes, have been rebuilt. They're, again, beautiful ones in all the harbors now. And one of the major sports, other than sailing, of course, is racing these canoes. And now there are competitions all through Polynesia, from Hawaii to Tahiti to New Zealand, where their whole teams will come out, and you'll see them practicing in the harbor. And then other places, the waters are tranquil enough for kayaking, and it's just a very maritime-oriented culture, which is, of course, sympathetic to my life. And so you'll see a lot of this on where we are in the ports. But if you go upland, it gets a little more extreme. This kind of jet boating is something that was developed here, mostly in the South Island. But these racing boats go up the rivers and around the lakes, and this is exactly not really quite nobody does this for relaxation. But New Zealand is the home of extreme sports, including spelunking in the caves, and this is I don't think this is done anywhere else. The rafting in underground rivers to go see in certain places the glowworms that are a nesting larval bug that light up a cave like some sort of a star galaxy. And then upland, there's all kinds of things. I'm sure everybody wants to go on a mountain bike ride, but this is a little easier. I recommend this if you want to just have a relaxing roll down a hill. Again, this is invented in New Zealand. It's hard to hold your drink while you're rolling upside down, though, I found out. And then up in the high mountains, particularly down to into the South Island, there are hang gliding, paragliding, bungee jumping. It's hard to do them all at once at the same time. Skydiving. But my favorite, though, is this one. It's air surfing. I don't know if he remembered his parachute, but anyway. And then again, we'll go down there. We'll see the very dramatic mountains and lakes of the South Island, where most people don't realize that this is a glaciated high mountain area where it's tremendous hiking, and this is where many a mountaineer has trained. And most famously, Sir Edmund Hillary, who was a dairy farmer, I believe, as a youth. He started hiking up in these mountains, and then went further, of course, and then he was the first, along with Tenzing Norgay, to summit Mount Everest. And so, of all the heroes of New Zealand, of which there have been many, including a few odd little hobbits, Sir Edmund Hillary is certainly the national icon. And once I was in Auckland, I actually went to his funeral at the cathedral in Auckland. I was impressed by the variety of people who came all from around the world to see him off. And I'll leave you with this last saying, that people do not decide to become extraordinary. They decide to accomplish extraordinary things. And that's could be a motto for the great nation here. So I wish you a great visit here, and I look forward to seeing you ashore in New Zealand. Thank you.